So today I will be talking about collaborative computer-based music composition and how it fosters creativity and learning within higher education. Undergraduate musicians are expected to demonstrate creativity in performance, composition and improvisation, and according to the QAA standards, they also require things that we consider to be creativity not explicitly as part of a creative domain. So areas such as flexibility of thought and action, different or alternative thinking, explore and express, and the confidence to carry a creative project to completion. Prior research on computer-based music composition in education, as we see beautifully, shows how computer music interfaces encourage particular kinds of computer-mediated composition learning and practice, learning to the development of new resources, new interfaces and alternative ways of engaging with sound and music. But those studies often focus on tutor and researcher-directed activities, but undergraduates are often free to choose their own DAWs in their own natural environments. So research needs to explore what happens in their own natural ecology of practice. As with Philip Kirkman's examination of secondary students' music-mediated composition, which observed that students develop tendencies and dependencies on methods because of how they support particular music composition practices, though his work suggests that there is value in giving students a freedom to choose. The balance between freedoms and constraints must place independence in decision-making at the heart of the compositional experience. Thus, the freedom of students to find and work within their chosen computer-mediated spaces may be a condition for any meaningful compositional development. Creativity might be exhibited through long-term student-led computer music practices, particularly as long-term computer music stimulates a process of problem proliferation, leading to divergent thinking, musical training, and problem solving. But computer music practice is not implicitly creative, necessarily, especially where familiar tools and techniques are dominant. So the research that I'm presenting today examined one long-term student-led collaboration involving two computer-based composers to investigate their emergence of work in a natural setting of collaborative practice and the impact on their learning and creativity. Creativity, of course, has been theorised as many individual qualities or processes, most recently considered by sociocultural theorists as something that is emergent through interrelationships with our environment, with our society, culture and physical settings, where the results cannot be anticipated by any single contributor. And I've just put a list of some of the references. I can provide proper references afterwards on request. For example, key research conducted by Keith Sawyer and Stacey DeZutter offer the concept of distributed creativity when looking at jazz improvisation and theatre improvisation. This is in collaborating creative groups, creativity is an ongoing social process, and a full explanation of process of distributed creativity requires empirical study of moment-to-moment processes whereby individual creative actions result in the emergence of a collective creative product. This is characterised in situations where collaborative groups of individuals collectively generate a shared creative product. So the jazz or the theatre improvisation is a good example. There are similarities between improvised music making and talk, especially where composers are using dialogue to think aloud and to explore and build on each other's ideas. So I take a sidestep through to the theoretical context. I've missed collaborative emergence, which is an important concept that they also present in relation to distributed creativity. They looked at theatre improvisation context to see observing situations that they describe as collaborative emergence, where the output of the activity is completely open, where each contribution is dependent on what happened just before, could not be anticipated, where each contribution is subsequently changed, is given different meaning by what happens afterwards. And there's an equality of contribution within the group. And they say that improvised narratives are good examples of collaborative emergence because they're so obviously created by collaborative efforts of the entire group. No single speaker creates the narrative. now I'm going to sociocultural theory. My research adopts a sociocultural perspective on creativity, which has its roots in Vygotsky's work on human development. This is concerned with how human action, in this case music practices, are mediated by interrelationships with tools, social, cultural, and concrete environments. This says psychological, and that says concrete. I don't know if you can see with the yellow, sorry. So this includes psychological tools such as language, including the concepts of music technology in this case, concrete tools such as physical spaces, paper and pen, or computer music equipment. Sociocultural theory supports an over-time focus, which is fundamental principle of Vygotsky's genetic method of researching human development. He says, to encompass in research the process of a given thing's development in all its phases and changes from birth to death fundamentally means to discover its nature, its essence, for it is only in movement that a body shows what it is. Collaborative computer-based composition is mediated by these tools, so I asked, how is the process of collaborative creating mediated by social and cultural contextual resources in small group, multidisciplinary creative practice over time, in my case with particular focus on computer-based music composers? The three sub-questions or sub-areas of focus include a focus on how they negotiate a common understanding about what they were making, how the process is mediated by the tools, concrete tools and resources in their environments, and how talk is implicated in the emergence and negotiation of ideas in creative work through time. The study was undertaken at a small satellite campus of a major UK university, incidentally not Huddersfield. 44 students were involved on a final year undergraduate module introducing multidisciplinary collaboration. The students proposed groups, formed projects, and delivered them over a 12-week period. The group selected for this study included 2 music technology students, a dancer, and a theatre practitioner. Data needed to capture the natural process, so this meant recording practice in all of their naturally occurring physical and social settings, as collaboration includes spontaneous creating. Using equipment provided and their own iPhones and other equipment, the students documented their practice, producing 24 hours of audio from 8 locations. The data included also diagrams and notes that they made as they worked on ideas together. Analysis needed to show how the emerging work was shaped to these settings, so talk was an important way of understanding how they were building shared understanding and referencing those contexts, remembered and anticipated as well. So an initial examination of the recordings, I was interested in what they talked about and how those topics related to each other. So just using an Excel spreadsheet, I started to document the dialogue and code it according to things like collaborating roles, establishing who took what roles. In the middle here, they're talking about process. At the top, they're talking about key facets of the work, so the creative content, and at the bottom here, elements of trying to understand and share practice. So then I could see movement, very rapid movement between these particular groups of focus, areas of focus. Satisfied that discourse could highlight their priorities and their situated meaning-making, recordings were transported into Cactus en Vivo, and then all of the topics were coded to identify the most recurrent creative focus, which in this case, the most recurrent creative theme was the audio-visual setting. So any time they were concerned about the relationship between sound and image and work with the soundtrack, I would isolate those episodes, which provided me with 1 hour and 54 minutes of data for transcription. There were many other themes, but this one carried them all the way through the collaboration in all of their physical and social environments, so I could get that trajectory. In terms of analysis, I used a number of sociocultural discourse analysis methods. Marit Arvaya provides a contextual resources analysis method which involves transcribing annotating transcripts according to particular contexts. So whenever they talked about the group, whenever they talked about physical environments, and whenever they made reference to wider social and cultural environments, I was able to annotate those and gain a deeper understanding about what they were monopolizing, what they were trying to use to understand each other. So these annotations would help me to understand meaning making. Discourse analysis was also used to examine the functions. So I used a form of interaction analysis from cognitive psychology, which helps to reveal ultimately the flow and the quality of talk. So from cognitive psychology, whenever a student presented a new idea, expressed a concern or showed understanding, these groups could be seen here, and you can see that on the handout, which I'll make reference to shortly. So that second form of annotation looked rather like this. So we should record that sound, I liked it. We have a process suggestion. We start to understand a little bit more about the quality of their interaction, especially with reference to what Neil Mercer has done with looking at small groups of children collaborating. He has done some really fantastic research showing how children engage in different qualities of talk, and some are educationally productive and some are not. So, for example, at the beginning of a collaboration, you might see cumulative talk, where they're building, not challenging, but agreeing and building on creative ideas together. And then perhaps disputational talk, where they're disagreeing, not engaging, and it's characterised by short responses. And then something which is considered more educationally valuable, where they're exploring, arguing, challenging and reasoning, but not just blandly agreeing. So to summarise on the theory, our Vyers method made it possible to see what the students resourced to develop understanding, and Mercer's helped us to see the quality of talk in relation to the emergence of creative work and collaborative practice. The work found that computer music co-creating is an extremely complex interrational accomplishment, and I will talk briefly about that before talking about the next two findings, because these are implicit in the first. That it fosters possibility thinking, which Anna Kraft calls the engine of little c, or personal creativity. And it also promotes resourcefulness, which I think is something we know, but a rather interesting type of resourcefulness in this case. The first finding, just to give one example, revealed how the characteristics of talk changed in relation to technology and the use of technology in music composition. Away from the computer, the composers exchanged in cumulative talk about ideas, showing a proliferation of sonic possibilities. For example, in the first transcript that you have, and I'll play it in a moment, the composers began exploring sound ideas. Their interaction functions included suggestions, explanations, developments, and support. So they're just imagining sounds through talk at this stage.
No, I mean, what sort of sound?
Yeah. Simply something which is high pitched and like a wash or something. Bulk of it sounds like a wash.
Okay.
You know, if you go to certain function moving the feet. I don't mean like a wash, but that kind of.
Maybe a high pitched noise with
metallic sound.
yeah, that's sort of like metallic sound, but I think with sort of like a buzz underneath. Like if you heard the club or 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
So
you did.
Yeah, it gets the reverb basically.
Yeah.
Gradually getting louder, and then when it comes to the drawing, it cuts down.
Yeah.
So you think sort of first, when does that thing cut in? The movement?
So this is an unproblematic sort of building of ideas, and if you're familiar with Jean, as I expect you are, you probably see different ways of referring to and talking about sound, and you could analyse their dialogue from various kinds of perspective to understand what they understand about sound. But also here, we're particularly interested in that building of ideas. Cumulative talk fosters peer confidence. It fosters shared endeavour, as collaborators are thinking together by way of self-explaining. Remembering sounds already recorded, the composers then approached a computer, and things changed. To consider the sounds available there, they were linking past events and recordings to anticipated activities, engaging in a sort of connection building. The quality of talk shifted to include more checks and questions. So cumulative talk transitioned to something more characteristic of disputational talk, and this is over the page on your transcripts.
I reckon the tape, a bit of tape stuff, you can make a lead sort of sound with that.
I'm going with the musicale.
Okay, well I think they'll work well together. Yeah?
Yeah.
Come on, Lou, we need to be vocal. I don't need, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just doing, I thought
I
we
know,
were
I
writing
know,
separately.
but I want confidence.
I know, but right now.
Exchanges became shorter and decision-making more individualised. The absence of anticipated response disrupted John's confidence, and that's important. And he lost his feeling of shared endeavour when they started to use the computer, which raises questions about how collaborative discourse is observed around technology-mediated creativity. Moving on, the challenge of integrating different areas of knowledge about music technology led to possibility thinking. With different skills and technical backgrounds and understandings about ambisonics in particular, they needed to establish a workflow. To do that, they imagined hypothetical processes building common ground around the work. So we see, I didn't give you a transcript of this, but I did put it up here for you to see. I'm very sorry about the sound quality.
So what I'm saying is that we get all of our sounds onto your computer. Yeah. You format them to be a format. Yeah. Give them to me. Yeah. Then I work on them. And then as soon as you give them up to me, you put them in the format. So they don't stay in my domain completely. Can I still do this multi-track composition? Yeah, you'll be doing exactly the same thing. So we know that when they come to me, they're already first stage of the processing. Yeah. Signal chains will be finished. Yeah. Then I put my effects on them, bounce them down, give them to you, and then you put the B format on them. Yeah, just stick a plug in on the output and stuff.
Throughout the course, I'm really sorry about the sound quality. As I say, I had to rely on them to collect the sound for me, rather than me collecting it, which raises other issues. Throughout the collaboration, the composers were continually building a shared understanding of anticipated, hypothetical, never-before-experienced situations. They imagined hypothetical uses with Maxim SP, sound spatialization, use of hardware, logistics, concepts, step by step, inventing hypothetical workflows that would integrate stereo and ambisonic files. They even imagined future conversations, which, by the way, were all cumulative in nature. In doing this imaginative work, though, they also expressed preferences about their approach, value to be involved in all aspects of sound development. They showed awareness of creative flow, by that I mean Csikszentmihalyi's reference to flow, and how individual practices affect collaboration. So the key point here is that discussion of hypothetical practices in music technology revealed a metacognition about process in relation to technology. The use of imagination in computer music therefore raises implications for the role that computer-based music composition can play in fostering creativity and learning through collaborative tasks. Finally, the work showed that creativity showed their resourcefulness, provided by a need to coordinate sounds and structures while working with an incompleted edit of the film. They did not have a complete film, so they had to decide how to structure it themselves. In this case, they drew sketches. This rather ambiguous shape shows them drawing the start to 5 minutes, to the middle, starting again to the last 5 minutes, to the end. Such sketches might be called self-reference forms of notation showing relative proportional measurement, such as height and time. Representations like this offer opportunities for different interpretations through self-explaining. And that's what's important in this respect. Observing children working with graphic scores showed that graphic representations of music and what the operalization of graphic scores are not merely demonstrations of what is on the page, they're psychological processes that are clearly mediated by perceptual influence. The composers struggled to establish what these sketches represented and how they would be useful, and we can see that on transcript 3, which I don't have a sufficiently good recording of, but they sort of start by saying, so yeah, they draw the first sketch and they're like, so we've got this, it doesn't really mean anything, no, does it? But that's sort of not the point, because it's the process that happens afterwards. It's trying to interpret this, unlocks other contexts for meaning. So, for example, here we see an improvised narrative, the building of shared language, common knowledge, and hypothetical use of this sketch and establishing what they might do with it. So, also remembering the film, I will put that 5 minutes because I thought that particular sound works there in terms of structure. It comes halfway through the piece, so she's starting off with something loud. He's remembering something they have in their shared history in order to make sense of what this sketch might be. He's unlocking a remote creative process and sharing it by using this tool.
I mean, I don't know if that system is good.
I like it. I think it works because I don't think it's... Because the way I see it is, you've got this gesture at 0 minutes and this gesture at 5 minutes. Or that'll be 6.
Right, 5 minutes. Okay.
But yeah, we've got this gesture here and here.
Yeah.
And then when a new gesture comes in, we can be like, yeah, we've got this new scene. And
We'll just go on.
yeah, we sort of go over it, redraw the whole
Yeah,
thing.
but these aren't gestures.
Yeah.
This is shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it still follows something, there's still a rise and something.
So, if you're familiar with sociocultural research, it has been criticised for only looking at situations where students appropriate existing tools, but not where situations where students create and then appropriate tools for meaning making. Therefore, the value of collaborative computer-based music practice in developing knowledge about creativity becomes important, more specifically because of how it opens up remote individualized processes, thought processes, that would remain otherwise hidden within collaboration. There are a few broader implications. Building on the idea of cumulative talk, in episodes of collaboration, this work points to a cumulative conversation, and how this is shaped moment by moment through multiple thinking spaces that include interthinking, distributed creating, post-dialogic reflection in shared and private spaces. Analysis needs to consider all of those spaces to understand how past, present and anticipated future resources shape joint activity. Also, long-term collaboration is a potentially valuable setting for developing self-awareness about process choices, especially how students shape their emergent contexts as they are happening through dialogue. Further research may explore how this kind of methodology might be appropriated as a teaching and learning and assessment tool for collaborative practices complementing existing tools such as process journals, Viva, creating a product. With the right analytic tools, students could examine events moment by moment to see for themselves how their practices are shaped in relation to the choice that they are making. But ultimately, the research shows how collaborative computer-based music composition fosters creativity as possibility thinking and resourcefulness. To engage more directly with the QAA benchmark statements, I hope that the work might provoke further investigation into strategies to understanding how collaborative computer music composition actually changes composition habits and presents opportunities for cognitive development and associated creativities within higher education. Thank you very much.
I understand the resources you use are mostly audio-based, so you have no video of the interactions. I was wondering whether you were on site sometimes.
I did have 8 hours of video. My research had to be determined by what they were prepared to collect. So this is a flaw in the research methodology, I would say, that they collected some video, but they didn't always understand what video to collect, which meant that really the audio was telling me everything I needed to know, except in some cases, and I could show you, for example, we would see a gesture accompanying a movement to help the students to emphasize something. And that was integrated into the analysis where I had that. So I only talked about the dialogue today, but the multimodal aspect of the work was secondary to the focus on dialogue because of the emphasis on expression and discourse through meaning making in that context. But I take your point.
Do you have any ideas about your results to extend to non-students, actual professionals working on music composition?
I would absolutely love to do this as to build on it as a multimodal study, but I also would like to develop something which is digestible and useful for professionals to document, say, an hour of collaborative practice and look at those elements and unpick them with a framework so they could develop their own metacognition of practice rather than me researching it. I think it could unlock a lot. To understand the moment-by-moment trajectory means to understand how turning to this person to speak rather than this person, just because they are a sound expert and this person is a dancer, it would change the trajectory of the composition or the practice completely. So I think it has the capacity to unlock creative transitions and choices, but also to evidence where creativity ideas are coming from. So to look at the final product and go back and say, what are the circumstances around the emergence of this seed? Where did this actually come from? I think it has the capacity to do something like that.
Possibly also assess the quality of the interaction for a given time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Keith Soy's work is really moving this into more of a business domain, looking at the characteristics and quality of talk from a self-awareness in a business context as well.
Just one last question. I mean, what's the difference between what you are doing and what anthropologists will be doing? And what's the difference between social cultural analysis and anthropology, basically?
Social cultural focus really is on higher mental development through discourse. It has more of an education context focus. So it's more focused on cognitive development, especially.
Yeah, I'm interested. You focus on computer-based music composition here, and I'm wondering how you might conjecture this would be different if the computer was not involved in the composition process. In other words, is more of what happened because it was multimodal to begin with, crossing different artistic disciplines, or was the presence and kind of the malleability of the process on the computer really key to how they were collaborating?
This is a really rich question, because my experience with the students, and I'm only speculating really, is that similar to Kirkman's. And again, in my teaching, they're very wedded to using, say, Ableton or Logic or this or that. So when you put them into collaboration, it disrupts. And then they have to find compromise, and they enter a zone of proximal development, Dr. Vygotsky would say, or an intermental development zone where they're trying to explain and negotiate terms in common language. In another discipline of music, I wonder if they may have had a more similar background. So we call this maybe a same discipline collaboration in computer music, but we know that it's a very wide proliferation of fields, but in more traditional music, maybe less so. So it would be very different sort of insight. I think it may be the starting point of other studies as well. I hope so, at least. Does that answer your question? Yeah, I think so. Okay. I'll be around the rest of the day. I'm sure there'll be questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.